My husband slapped me at his work dinner. I ended his career. I don't know if I'm the villain in this story or the survivor. Some days, I'm not sure there's a difference. But I do know this. My husband Craig slapped me in front of 12 people at his company dinner in March, and by doing it publicly, he handed me the only weapon I'd ever need to escape him. He didn't realize it at the time. Actually thought he'd gotten away with it. But that one moment of violence in front of witnesses became the thread I pulled until his entire life unraveled. We'd been married 8 years when it happened. 8 years of walking on eggshells, of making myself smaller and quieter, of believing his anger was somehow my responsibility to manage. Craig worked in sales for a medical supply company. 20 years with the same firm, climbing the ladder, getting promotions, making decent money. He was good at his job. Charming with clients. Everyone at work loved him. They had no idea what he was like when the door closed and nobody was watching. The company held quarterly dinners for the Northeast sales team. Fancy restaurants, open bar, spouses invited. I'd been to maybe 6 of them over the years. They were always the same. Craig would be loud and funny, the life of the party, telling stories and making everyone laugh. I'd sit next to him and smile and nod, and try not to say anything that might embarrass him. Because if I embarrassed him in public, I'd pay for it later at home. This particular dinner was at an Italian place downtown. White tablecloths, dim lighting, wine bottles everywhere. Craig's boss, Richard, was there with his wife. About 12 other people from the team, some with spouses, some alone. I wore the dress Craig had picked out for me that morning. Navy blue, conservative, nothing flashy. He'd looked me over before we left and said I looked acceptable. That was the best compliment I ever got from him. Dinner started fine. Everyone was drinking and talking. Craig was in his element, telling some story about a difficult client he'd won over. People were laughing. I was quiet like always. Then someone asked me what I did for work. I said I used to do bookkeeping but hadn't worked in a few years. The woman seemed surprised, asked why I'd stopped. I could feel Craig's eyes on me. I gave the answer he'd taught me to give, that his salary was enough, that we decided it made more sense for me to be available for him. She nodded like that made sense. But I saw something in her expression. Pity, maybe. Like she could tell it wasn't really my choice. Craig squeezed my knee under the table. Hard. His version of a warning. Later in the meal, after everyone had a few drinks, the conversation shifted to annoying habits. Richard's wife was joking about how her husband leaves his coffee cups all over the house. Other people chimed in with their own complaints. Harmless stuff. The kind of teasing couples do. I don't know what possessed me to say anything. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe I was tired of being invisible. But when there was a lull in the conversation, I said, Craig leaves his socks everywhere. I find them in the weirdest places. Last week there was a pair on top of the refrigerator. Everyone laughed. Not mean laughing. Just the normal kind of laughter that follows a mildly funny observation. Craig's coworker Brendan said something like, "On the refrigerator? How does that even happen?" I was smiling. Other people were smiling. It was a nothing moment. Should have been forgotten 5 seconds later. But Craig didn't laugh. I felt the shift in energy before I saw his face. The way his whole body went rigid next to me. I looked over, and his jaw was clenched. His eyes had that flat look I knew too well. The one that meant I'd crossed a line I didn't know existed. It happened fast. He turned toward me and slapped me across the mouth. Not a tap. A real hit. Hard and sharp. My head snapped to the side. I tasted blood immediately. The table went silent. Craig laughed. Like he'd just made a joke. "Keeping the wife in line, you know how it is," he said. His voice was casual. Like slapping me was the punchline. I touched my lip. My fingers came away red. Richard looked uncomfortable. Shifted in his seat. Made a sound that might have been a nervous chuckle. A few people stared at their plates. One woman's eyes were wide, but she didn't say anything. Brendan and his wife Geneva were sitting across from us. They both saw everything. Geneva looked horrified. Brendan's mouth was hanging open slightly. Then someone changed the subject. Started talking about something work-related. Everyone seemed relieved to have somewhere else to look. Craig squeezed my shoulder. His fingers dug into the muscle hard enough to hurt. He leaned close and whispered, "Don't embarrass me like that again." I excused myself to the bathroom. My legs felt shaky. In the mirror, I saw the split in my lower lip, blood on my teeth, a red mark spreading across my left cheek. I wet a paper towel and held it to my mouth until the bleeding stopped. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I came back to the table, Craig was telling another story. Everyone was laughing again, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just been hit in front of all of them. I sat down and Craig put his arm around my shoulders. To anyone watching, it probably looked affectionate, but I could feel the tension in his grip, the unspoken threat. We stayed another hour. I didn't say a single word, just sat there with my split lip and my burning cheek and smiled when I was supposed to smile. In the car afterward, Craig was angry. Not the explosive kind of angry, the cold kind. "You made me look bad," he said, joking about my habits like I'm some kind of child who can't take care of himself. I said nothing. Experience had taught me that anything I said would make it worse. "Richard probably thinks I can't control my own household," he continued. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. "This could affect my promotion." That's when I spoke. I couldn't help it. "Your promotion? You hit me." Craig rolled his eyes. "I barely touched you. You're being dramatic. You've always been too sensitive." The next morning, my lip was swollen, purple bruise spreading across my cheek. Craig came into the kitchen while I was making breakfast. Didn't apologize. Didn't even acknowledge what had happened. Just complained that breakfast was taking too long. "I'm meeting Richard for golf. Can't be late because you're moving slowly." I stood at the stove flipping eggs, and something inside me shifted. Craig was right about one thing. The dinner was going to affect his promotion, just not in the way he thought. I waited until he left. Then I called his company, asked to speak to HR. The woman who answered transferred me to someone named Janet. I told her I needed information about the company's domestic violence policies. "We have very strict zero-tolerance policies," Janet said. Her voice was professional but kind. "Any employee who commits an act of violence faces immediate termination. This applies even to incidents outside of work, especially if other employees witness the behavior." "Even at a company dinner?" I asked. "Especially at a company dinner. That's a company-sponsored event. If something happened, we'd need to investigate immediately." I thanked her and hung up. Made an appointment for Monday morning. The weekend passed in a blur. Craig acted like everything was normal. Went golfing with Richard. Came home and complained about dinner. Watched TV. Ignored the bruises on my face except to tell me to put more makeup on because I looked ridiculous. Monday morning, I put on a turtleneck even though it was warm. Covered the fingerprint bruises on my shoulder where he'd grabbed me. Drove to Craig's office building and went straight to HR. Janet was probably in her 50s. Gray hair pulled back. No-nonsense expression. She led me to a small conference room and closed the door. "You said you needed to discuss a sensitive matter?" I took a breath. "My husband works here. Craig Dalton. He hit me at the company dinner last Friday night, in front of Richard and the entire Northeast sales team." Janet's expression didn't change, but she picked up a pen. "Craig Dalton is your husband?" "Yes. He slapped me when I made a joke. Made my lip bleed. Richard saw it. Everyone saw it." "This is very serious," Janet said. She was already writing notes. "We'll need to launch an immediate investigation. I'll need you to provide a detailed statement. Names of everyone who was present." I told her everything. The comment about the socks. The slap. Craig's joke about keeping me in line. How everyone saw and nobody said anything. How he grabbed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. Janet took notes and asked questions. How long had we been married? Had this happened before? Why I was coming forward now. "This happened 3 days ago," she said. I needed time to think, to decide if I was ready for what comes next. "What comes next is an investigation," Janet said. "We'll interview everyone who was at that dinner. We'll review our policies and applicable laws. And if the investigation confirms what you're telling me, Craig will be terminated." "I understand. This will likely affect your marriage." "My marriage is already affected. He hits me. This is just the first time anyone else saw it happen." By Tuesday afternoon, HR had interviewed everyone from the dinner. I know because Craig came home early, slamming the door hard enough to shake the walls. "You went to my work?" His face was red. "Are you insane? You hit me in front of your coworkers. That's insane." "It was nothing." A tap. Now I might lose my job over your sensitivity. Good. Craig grabbed my wrist, squeezed until my bones ground together. You're going to call Janet right now. Tell her you exaggerated. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. I pulled my arm free.
No.
This is my career. Our income. How will we pay the mortgage? Maybe you shouldn't have hit your wife at a company event. He punched the wall, put a hole in the drywall next to my head. You've done it now. When I fix this, you're going to regret ruining my life. Wednesday, Craig was suspended pending investigation. Thursday, he tried to do damage control. Called Richard directly. Told him I was mentally unstable. On medication. Made things up for attention.
Richard didn't buy it.
Craig, I saw you hit her. We all did. She provoked me. She's always provoking me. Richard reported that conversation to HR, said Craig showed zero remorse. Was actually blaming me, making threats about what would happen when he fixed this. Friday, Craig was fired. He came home with a cardboard box of his desk belongings.
20 years with that company gone. 20 years, he said.
His voice was shaking. Not with sadness. With rage. 20 years gone because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. You mean because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself. He threw the box at me.
Missed.
You've destroyed everything. My reputation is ruined.
He was right about that part.
Word spread fast in his industry. He applied to other companies. They called for references. Richard told them exactly why Craig was terminated. Physical violence against his spouse at a company function. No one would touch him after that. Craig's brother Xavier called me 2 weeks later. You need to help Craig. He made a mistake. Tell people it wasn't that bad. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. He hit me in public. Are you really going to destroy his life over one slap? He destroyed his own life. And it wasn't the first time. Just the first time with witnesses. Xavier hung up on me. By month 2, Craig couldn't find work anywhere. We were behind on the mortgage. He blamed me every single day. If you hadn't gone to HR. If you weren't so sensitive. If you just kept quiet like you're supposed to. One afternoon, I said the eggs were going to take a few more minutes. Craig exploded. Started screaming about how I ruined everything. How I was useless. How he should never have married me. Then he hit me. Not a slap this time. His fist against the side of my head.
Once. Twice.
3 times. I fell. He kept hitting me. The back of my head. My shoulders. I was crying and begging him to stop, but he wouldn't. I heard the front door open. Craig was still hitting me. Then I heard a sound like a bell ringing. Craig screamed in pain. I looked up. His mother Juliet was standing there with a frying pan raised over her head. Blood was running down Craig's temple where she'd hit him. Get your purse, Juliet said to me. Her voice was shaking but steady. Get your phone. I scrambled to grab my things. Craig was on the floor, holding his head. Blood everywhere. He looked up at us, and I saw murder in his eyes. He started to get up. Juliet moved between us. Still holding the pan. Try it. I'll hit you again. Craig took a step forward. Started screaming about how I ruined him. How this was all my fault. How he'd make me pay. Juliet backed toward the door, pulling me with her. Craig followed us onto the porch. Still yelling. Making threats. We ran to her car. My hands were shaking so bad, I couldn't get the seatbelt clicked. Juliet started the engine and backed out fast. Craig stood in the yard pointing and shouting. At Juliet's house, she locked the door behind us. Made tea. Her hands were shaking. She kept apologizing. Over and over. I should have seen it sooner, she said. The signs were there. The way he talked about you. His temper. But I told myself he was different from his father. His father? Juliet started crying. He used to hit me too. I left when Craig was 12. I thought Craig learned from that. That he'd never become like him. But I was wrong. I told her about the other times Craig had hit me. Times when nobody was around. When I couldn't prove it happened. She reached across the table and held my hand. You need to stay here, she said. Craig will come looking for you. He's even angrier now. She picked up her phone. I'm calling the police. Juliet, I don't know if. He almost killed you. Next time I might not be there with a pan. The police came 20 minutes later. Took my statement. Took pictures of my injuries. the bruises on my head and neck from where Craig had hit me over and over. They took Juliet's statement about what she'd seen. Then they asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at Juliet. She nodded. Yes, I whispered. They went to arrest Craig that night. Charged him with domestic assault. The officers explained how to get a restraining order. Said I should file first thing in the morning. One of them mentioned Craig's termination. That'll help your case. Shows a pattern. I realized then that going to HR in March had created a paper trail. Proof that this wasn't a one-time thing. That Craig had a history. That paper trail might save your life, the officer said. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump. Around 3 in the morning, Juliet came in and sat on my bed. Started telling me about leaving Craig's father. How scared she'd been. How she'd wasted 15 years believing he would change. The hardest part was admitting all that time was gone, she said. That I couldn't get those years back. We talked until sunrise. She shared things she'd never told anyone. I did the same. The next morning, the police called. Craig had been arrested. Charged with domestic assault. There would be a bail hearing in 2 days. I filed for a restraining order that afternoon. The judge reviewed the police report and photos of my injuries. Signed the order immediately. Craig was legally banned from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of me. I went back to the house with the police escort to get my things. Everything looked normal but felt wrong. Like I could see violence in every corner. The kitchen where he'd shoved me into the counter. The living room where he'd grabbed my throat. The bedroom where he'd made me feel worthless.
I packet fast. Clothes.
Important papers. Photos from before everything got bad. Left it all behind. At the bail hearing 2 days later, I sat in the back with sunglasses on. Craig sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. Didn't look at me when I walked in. His lawyer argued Craig wasn't a flight risk. No prior record. Worked at the same company for 20 years before his recent termination. The prosecutor stood up. She was young but confident. The defendant was terminated from his job for workplace violence against his spouse. There's a documented pattern of abuse. He's shown no remorse and actually blames the victim. The judge looked at Craig. Do you have anything to say? Craig stood. Your Honor, my wife and I had a disagreement that got out of hand. I was under stress from losing my job. The judge cut him off. This isn't about stress. This is about assault. Bail is set at $50,000. Craig's face went white. Your Honor, I can't afford that. Then you'll remain in custody until trial. Next case. Guards led Craig away. He finally looked at me then. Pure hatred in his eyes. I looked right back without flinching. With Craig in jail, I started rebuilding. Juliet helped me open a bank account in only my name. We went to our old joint savings, and I withdrew half. $2,000. My hands shook signing the withdrawal form. Juliet gave me another $2,000. You need a safety net. I found a lawyer. She agreed to take my divorce case at a reduced rate given the circumstances. We filed the paperwork immediately. I started therapy. The counselor helped me understand that Craig's violence wasn't about me. That his need for control was the problem. That I'd been isolated and manipulated for years. I also started applying for jobs. Updated my resume. Explained the gap honestly in interviews. One small accounting firm took a chance on me. Entry-level position. I almost cried when they offered it. Craig violated the restraining order 3 weeks into his probation. Started sending me emails at my new work address. The first one apologized. The second blamed me. The third threatened me. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. She filed a motion immediately. Craig's bail was revoked. He went back to jail until trial. The criminal trial was 6 months after the initial assault. I testified about the company dinner. The previous incidents. The attack at our house. Brendan and Geneva testified about what they saw at the dinner. Juliet described stopping Craig with the frying pan. Craig took the stand in his own defense. Blamed me for everything. Said I provoked him. That he was under stress. That I went to his work specifically to destroy his career. The prosecutor destroyed him on cross-examination. Made him admit he'd hit me more than 10 times over the course of our marriage. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Found him guilty. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in jail. 3 years probation after. Mandatory anger management and domestic violence counseling. Craig stared at me as they led him away in handcuffs. I stared back. The divorce was finalized while Craig was in prison. He didn't fight anything. Signed whatever they put in front of him. I got the car that was paid off. Half our savings. Zero responsibility for his debt. The house went into foreclosure. I didn't care. It was never really home anyway. I kept working at the accounting firm. 3 months in, my boss offered me a raise and more responsibilities. 6 months after that, I enrolled in online accounting courses. Started rebuilding the career I'd given up when Craig convinced me I wasn't smart enough for real work. 1 year after leaving Craig, I found my own apartment. Tiny 1-bedroom near my job. I bought new locks and installed them myself. Hung curtains on every window. Made it mine. I started dating again, eventually. Met someone kind. Someone who respected boundaries. Who never made me feel small or afraid. Who celebrated my successes instead of feeling threatened by them. 2 years after the company dinner, I got promoted to senior accounting associate. Salary of $60,000 a year. More than Craig had ever made. I called Juliet and told her. She cried happy tears.
Said she was proud of me.
I was proud of me too. 3 years after Craig's sentencing, someone from the domestic violence shelter reached out. Said a woman had come in asking about resources. Mentioned her husband's name during intake. Craig had remarried. I felt nothing but worry for her. I couldn't save someone who didn't know she needed saving yet. But I sent anonymous packets about Craig's history to every domestic violence resource in his area. Everything documented and public record. Added a note that this man had a pattern. I'd done what I could. 5 years after the company dinner, Juliet and I had dinner on my back porch. Anniversary of the day she'd hit Craig with that frying pan. Neither of us planned it that way. It just happened. She squeezed my hand. That night changed everything for both of us.
She was right.
She'd become a fierce advocate for domestic violence awareness. Spoke at community events about not enabling abusive family members. Her talks filled auditoriums. She got letters from people who'd left abusers after hearing her speak. We'd both transformed our pain into purpose. I think about that company dinner sometimes. Craig slapping me in front of everyone. How it felt like the end of the world in that moment.
The shame.
The blood. Everyone staring. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my freedom. His violence in front of witnesses forced me to stop hiding. The public nature of it gave me proof. Gave me witnesses. Gave me the push I needed to report him and leave. I'm not grateful for the abuse. I'll never say I'm glad it happened. But I'm proud of the survivor I became. Strong enough to rebuild from nothing. Independent enough to trust my own choices. Happy in a way I never thought possible when I was married to Craig. He tried to destroy me and failed. I'm still here. Still standing. Still moving forward. And he's just a bad memory that gets smaller every day.
Stay safe out there. Until next time.